Welcome everyone to today's session. This session is part two of a two-part series. So about a month and a half ago now, we did from spreadsheets to databases, a guide to structuring your data with Noloco part one. And that was really where we laid the foundation on the benefits of moving from the world of spreadsheets to databases and gave, the basics 101 on databases. So both the how and the why of moving into that world. And we were joined by Ben then, but let's jump into introductions for those of you who do not know us yet and may not have tuned in to part one. So first and foremost, my name is Gill and I head up our partnerships function here at Noloco. So I have the great pleasure of working really closely with our service partners and data integration partners who help bring Noloco to a wider audience and help our customers activate on our platform. And one of those wonderful partners that we work with is, in fact, Ben McLeave, the co-founder and president of Automation Helpers, who will be co-hosting the event that we're running today on part one, as I mentioned. So yeah, Ben, I'll hand over to you if you want to do a quick intro to yourself for the new folks in the room.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So yeah, at Automation Helpers, we're an agency, and so we do no-code development. Noloco is one of our preferred partners, and so I'd say 60-70% of our clients are using Noloco for their portal on the front end. So it's been a lot of fun working with Jill and with Dara at Noloco over the last, it's been what, 6-7 months now since we've really started together. And so we have a team of 17 consultants that help with implementations. And so a lot of the work that we've done with clients, I'll be including in stories today as we go through the database design and talking about how to move from spreadsheets to Noloco or no-code databases that are structured on the back end.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Ben. So Ben will be leading the live demonstration, but before we dive into that part of the session, I think it'd be really good to just recap on what we covered in part one and what we plan to cover in part two, especially for those who might be tuning in for the first time today. And as a brief synopsis, really the first part of the session in part one was all about just understanding the limitations of spreadsheets. Although we love spreadsheets and are so familiar with them and many people use them every day in business, running your entire business operations off them might not be the most sustainable approach. So we dived into some of the drawbacks of that, but more importantly, we gave a really great tutorial on how you can move from the world of spreadsheets into a structured database world. So had a real example where we had data in a spreadsheet, we learned about normalizing data, and then, of course, how would you build that replica that you have in your spreadsheet into a Noloco database? So a lot of the concepts that were discussed on the Noloco tables would translate to, any other database, no-code database out there. So things like, one-to-many relationships, fields, tables, columns, the real basics that you need to know how to implement a related database. So following that, we then kind of discussed, okay, now why would I want to structure my data in such a way, and what benefits can businesses gain from this approach? So, some of those, namely, of course, are having your data in a more secure source, right? You can apply permissions and role-based access control on that data, especially inside Noloco. And once you have that sort of foundation set, you can then feel safe in the knowledge to build an application on top of that data, give your teams and your external stakeholders accessibility to that data, and ultimately result in better collaboration with all of those people that you work with day in, day out inside of your app. And then ultimately, once your data is secure and your data is more accurate now being stored in the database, it lends itself to much more improved operations, faster decision-making, more accurate decision-making, as the data you're actually looking at is, in fact, integral and it has its integrity even intact. And yeah, ultimately helps businesses scale and grow. So that is ultimately kind of a summary of what we covered in part one. And it laid the foundation for what we're going to discuss in part two. So we will be going back into the database builder view of the world, but this time sort of building on more advanced concepts than what we covered in session one. So think things like many-to-many relationships, junction objects, and understanding when to use them, why to use them, and what ultimately will that allow me to do in the front end if I structure my data in this more sophisticated way. And that will lead us nicely into the next part, where we'll go into the app builder itself and start looking at more advanced charts and reports, how you can visualize this data in a really compelling way so that you can tell a story with your data, make better decisions with your data, and just make your app pop, really, as well as making better decisions for, for your business. And then finally, we'll touch a little bit at the very end on the role-based access controls again. And the great thing about Noloco is when you implement your permission rules on your database layer, it will carry forward across the app. So when users are loading app or loading charts in the app, and there's a permission rule applied on that piece of data, it will carry forward on the chart as well. So little snippets like that as well, just to really kind of, I suppose, strengthen our understanding of the advanced database concepts that we'll be discussing today. So yeah, that's ultimately what we're going to be going through in part 2. It's definitely a level up from part 1. But yeah, I really hope you enjoy the show. And I suppose over to you now, Ben, to kind of go through some more slide content before we get into the demo.
Yeah, so to recap on some of the topics that we covered in part 1, Jill, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
When we were working with spreadsheets, it was the first session was really about how to structure the data in a way that made sense. We're not replicating tables. A lot of our customers, when they were working with spreadsheets initially, they would have to copy the spreadsheet over for every new customer that they had to either run a project with them or to have a structured data set that matched for every client. And as companies scale, it's fine if you only have 2 or 3 customers, but when you get 10, 20, 30 customers, if you want to make an update to that spreadsheet, it makes it really difficult. And so we talked about how to structure the data in a way in Noloco where you can set up relationships like the one-to-many relationship. And so this is a core concept in database design where the one-to-many relationship is often called like the parent-child relationship as well. But it helps describe how the data relates to each other. So in the case that we have here with regions, there might even be a third layer with countries where you could have Europe as the region, and then you could have France or England as the countries. And then from there, another layer deep where Paris and London are cities in those countries. And so with that relationship, Europe would have many countries associated with it, but France, as an example, only has one region associated with it. France doesn't exist in Europe and North America. So that one-to-many relationship is a way to describe the data structure and help us understand how to structure the data in a way that we can then utilize it in the right way in Noloco. So during our last session, that's what we mainly focused on, is how to take a convoluted data structure and set it up where it made sense. Today, we're going to be diving into something a bit more complicated. So in order to get to the complicated topics, there's another data structure called the many-to-many relationship, which just has more components to it, right? Where in this example with a project, you could have multiple team members working on multiple projects. And so in this case, with only 3 records on each table, it's not too difficult to keep track of. But when you get to the point where you have 100 projects and 20 different team members, and there might be tasks associated with the project, ensuring that you have the right data structure will help to make sure you can scale your company. So I think the genesis of this whole discussion, part 1 and part 2 about structuring data, is a lot of our clients came to us and they would have hundreds of columns in their spreadsheets. And so they may have a project, and then there was, 10, 20, 30 different phases that would be associated with the project. And then with each phase, we had one customer that wanted to track the estimate, the high and the low estimate for how much the phase would cost. And so not only was it the 20 phases that they were keeping track in the project spreadsheet, but then they were also tracking the high and low estimate for each phase, which was another 40 columns. And so just the phase data was taking so many columns, and it, going into their database that they had. They actually went from a spreadsheet to another no code tool. It was just really hard to get a sense of what was happening and then run the right analysis to provide the metrics for the company that we were working with. So what we recommended to them was like, okay, let's take this many-to-many relationship that we have between the projects and the phases. And then they had another layer deeper with the tasks. And I was like, let's split this up into different tables and just have it be more structured. So that way the 80 columns can be condensed into, really it was about 4 columns in the phase table. And by linking those tables together, it made it much more efficient. So what we'll be discussing today is this many-to-many relationship, because one of the great things about no code is sometimes it makes sense to leave a many-to-many relationship as it is. Sometimes though, it makes sense to split it out. So in the case of projects, for example, one of the things that we've done, and Jill, if you want to go to the next slide, the projects, to give you an example of when to keep a many-to-many relationship together and when to split it out. If staffing needs to happen at different stages of a project, there may be a many-to-many relationship between project staffing and the people, and it can make sense in Noloco. Whereas with the project, if you're trying to keep track of each milestone and who's staffed to each milestone in the project, then you almost get a matrix structure, and that's when you get the hundreds of columns and just the difficulty in trying to manage the structure and how to scale it out. So what we're going to be talking about today with junction tables is when it makes sense to split it out and when it makes sense to keep it as a many-to-many relationship just for ease of building, because it doesn't make sense to create another table just to create another table. And so I think this is the real power of Noloco and other no-code tools, is that you don't have to follow a normalized structure all the time, but when it makes sense, it's really easy to set that up and to visualize in the system. So first thing we're going to work through is see some examples of when it makes sense to leave it together, and then we'll work through some examples of when to split out and have a junction table combining 2 different tables together.
Brilliant. That's great. I think that's such a great example that you gave as well around, coming from the spreadsheet world and where we're all so familiar with having like hundreds of columns. And I think it's really important to call out for anyone tuning in as well today that, maybe considering that leap from spreadsheets to the world of databases, it's really important that we don't just copy everything over as is and continue to just, okay, now my data is in a database and just use it in the spreadsheet way. And the key piece of understanding is knowing, like, once I have it in a database, but like, what is the benefit? Like, what can I do differently? And how is it going to visualize easier for me? And it's at the beginning of that journey where people often it doesn't fully click that if I build a relationship and pull out maybe 20 fields from the 100 field table into its own tab, and I can now click from the project down into a task related to that project, that I have that navigation experience and I can still go back to the source piece of information or the parent record I started on. So sometimes parent-child, one-to-many relationships, those terminology can kind of maybe be daunting at the start. But the aim of this session and having demonstrations of this will hopefully allow you to start piece together, what these terms mean with an example. And that's what Ben's going to do today. So I just wanted to call that out, the why, and although it's daunting, the terminology will be broken down into some real examples. So you can, hopefully it'll click in your head. So yeah, I suppose without further ado, I think it's over to you, Ben, to dive into the demo and go through some of those junction object examples that you had on your previous slide. So I'll stop sharing, and yeah, feel free to take over.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jill. So to start, during our last session, we had created a CRM. So with a CRM, there was accounts that we were tracking. There was users internally that were owning the accounts and managing the contacts at those accounts. And then we were also tracking activities. So one of the common use cases that we see is being able to at a group level have everyone see the visibility of who's messaging who at a company. And so that's the idea of this activities table. And you can imagine on a message, it's not always one person emailing another person. Sometimes it's multiple people CC'd on an email. And so the communication lines aren't always direct on one-to-one. So the relationship between a contact and an activity is that many-to-many relationship. And so the way that we had set it up when we had done part one is with that many-to-many relationship. And it actually works great in Noloco with an activity. If we come in here, we'll see the relationship where we can add multiple contacts. So if I edit this record, I can select another contact and it does it quite nicely. We can see down here in the related records, Noloco pulls the contact as a related record into the activity view. And it's really easy to pull that data in and see information about that contact with that activity. And then if we go the reverse, if we look at the contact and we can see a list of the activities that they have. So the message or the email that we were just looking at, and then all the other messages that this contact Newt Singh has made over the course of time. So with Noloco, and I think really the differentiation point of when to consider splitting out these related records, this many-to-many relationship into a junction table. If it's as simple as linking the tables together, so in this case, the contact linking to the activity, it's completely fine to leave as a many-to-many relationship between the two tables because Noloco handles it well. And it's actually really easy to visualize those relationships and navigate between them within Noloco. The difficulty comes when there's additional data that needs to be stored about that many-to-many relationship. So as an example of things that we often encounter is with the CRM, often it'll lead to a project or a deal. So something needs to happen with that contact after they become a customer. So often we'll set up a project management system for our customers, and we've set it up internally at Automation Helpers as well. And so within a project, there's a few different levels, but more often than not, it's going to be project, and there's going to be at least a task level with a project. And so with tasks, let me actually go into the data side, and we can look at the tasks table. Recently, we were working on a project with a client, and they had this structure set up, the projects, and then they had tasks associated with the project. And for them, they tracked their time with the project in order to do invoicing with customers. And so the time needed to roll up from all of the tasks associated with the project into the project and ultimately into an invoice. And so the relationship between the project and the task is obviously one-to-many. A project can have many tasks, but a task should only be associated with one project. The difficulty with this structure came up because the client, they're in the construction industry, and so they had many projects that would last a long time. And so a lot of these tasks would be weeks, if not months, to complete. And so you can imagine you're not going to log your time just at the end of the month for a task. And so what they needed was a way to track multiple time entries from multiple people. And so the relationship between the time log and the task, it went from being one-to-one, which we do internally and which a lot of our other customers did, to that many-to-many relationship where a task could have many time logs, and a time log is a person noting their time down. So the relationship between the task and the user table was many-to-many. A user could log time to multiple tasks, and a task could have multiple people on the time log. And so for us, this was a perfect scenario for a junction table because it's not just connecting the person with the task. There's additional data that needed to be stored about that task. So in this case, we needed to store time. And then there were some other calculations that we needed to make with the time. So sometimes people would log come in and log their time after the fact, and other times they would use like a timing mechanism to start time and to end time. And so because of that metadata, instead of creating multiple columns in order to track time for each person, we didn't know if there was going to be 10 time logs to a task, if there was going to be 100. And when it's dynamic like that, you need a junction table in order to not go crazy and try to
Exactly.
manage.
Exactly. It's a great example. I think I came across this before when you had an event and you had an event manager, but then there were some scenarios where you might have like three event, like, coordinators, sorry, not manager, but like coordinators. And it's like, okay, now I have to add another field on event to store a third coordinator. And then, next month we might have four coordinators an event, but that is absolutely not the use case. So you shouldn't keep extending those columns on the event table, or as Ben said, on the project table or the task table. So it's a perfect opportunity to create this junction object, where it relates to both things: a person, an event, and a coordinator. That will change all the time depending on the scenario. So yeah, this is another example of where I saw something recently. It comes up all the time, and I didn't really realize that it was called a junction object until very recently. But now everyone here does. So
You get so used to building, and it's one of those things when you do it enough, you're just like, oh, this is the way that it needs to be done. But I think the clear indicator that you need a junction object or a junction table is if you have a spreadsheet or a table that's just getting very long with the columns. When that
exactly.
happens, it's like, just think, oh, okay, I need to either turn this into another table and create a many-to-many relationship, or turn it into another table and create another table as that junction object or junction table between the two.
It's kind of two scenarios there. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go through kind of the example of building this out. So I have the main structure set already with the time logs where we have the date, we have the hours, and the person that would log the time. And so in order to connect this to tasks, we'll go ahead and just create a task here, and then we'll link it to the task table. And in Noloco, this is, we went through this in part one, but just to kind of recap, this is where we set up the relationship between the two tables. So in this case, with a time log, we don't want it linking to multiple tasks. A time log should be linked to only one task, but a task should be able to have multiple time logs to it. So this setup is correct. And we'll just call this time logs here, and we'll go ahead and add the field. And so now that the field is added, you see that we get the yellow notification on the permissions because there's a new field on the task now. It automatically creates the time log linked record field in the task table. And I'm going to go ahead and fill out a record here where we'll just log some time from today. We'll say that it's I believe this is 3 hours. And we'll pick a team member, and we'll just pick this first task here. And so when we save this, if we come back to the tasks table, I might have set this up incorrectly. So we'll do the hours here. So let's go ahead and input 3 hours. So when we come into the task table, we now have a time logs record that's associated with it. And one of the things that we'll be able to do, previously we were tracking the time in a static way. But now one of the things that we can add in the tasks table is what's called a roll-up field. So let's create a field called total time. And there's an option called a roll-up here. And what the roll-up does is it takes all of the related records from a linked table, and it performs an action on those records. So in this case, the related field that we want is hours, and we'll want to do a sum of all of those hours. So we're going to take all of the time logs that are associated with the task. And so if there's 10 time logs, and between the 10, there's 30 hours that are aggregated together, that's the number that we would see in this field. And so this allows us to do some calculation on a table, similar to Excel. Like if you were to do, a type of roll-up linking between different tables, it's a similar type of exercise here. So what we'll do is just create one more time log so that we can see it in action. So we'll link to the same task here. So we'll create another record and we'll say that it's a different team member that's working 4 hours on this task. And let's say that they worked earlier this week. And so now that we have it added, if we come back to the tasks, we see that the total time will update. So this is really powerful to have the data structured in the right way, but then also have the metrics flowing in the way that we need, where we can go from that child record to that parent record and do that summary data in an automated way. So this, from a database standpoint, this makes it really powerful to not just run calculations, but then use these numbers in charts and dashboards and reports in the front end without having to do crazy calculations or export it to Excel to crunch the data. It all just comes more or less automatically after it's set up in the system.
Yeah, it looks great. Love the use of roll-up fields there. Again, sometimes an overlooked field type. So great to see that in action. Hopefully give some people some food for thought.
So before we jump into graphs and charts on the front end, I'd be curious if anyone has any questions just on what we talked about with junction tables, the setup of those tables, or performing the calculations.
I think at the moment there's not too many questions in just yet. I did pop in them in the chat to encourage those to pop in. So if something is on your mind that was covered during the first section of this, so the junction objects, the database concepts we discussed, please do pop them in and we'll make sure to answer them live. But why don't we carry on into the charts for now? And I feel like that might start posing some interesting questions, how we go about building them and things like that. So, and if anything does pop up that is based on the earlier parts, as I say, we'll make sure to still answer them live, so don't worry. But yeah, I think we can probably carry on and get into the front end for now.
Perfect. So as we get into the charts, with no code, and I guess really with any application that you're setting up, what we've seen is there's 3 main stages that companies go through. So the first stage is usually what we just talked about, of structuring data in the right way. If you don't have data structured in the right way, then it's really difficult to do anything with that data. And so oftentimes what we hear from clients is they say that they're just confused, or they don't know if they're doing it right when they're starting to wade in to the database setup in no code. And I think part of that is because structuring data is a complicated process. You have to think through your workflows of how the data moves throughout the organization. Because with no code, it's not just setting up the data structures and letting everyone have at it. Usually there's workflows or automations that need to be set up with the data so that it flows properly. So if a lead comes in, having that lead assigned to the right person on the team, or with a project, when a project hits a certain status, or if a task is complete, updating information and notifying the customer and the team about what's happening. And so with that data structuring phase, there's usually workflow process that changes, and there's a change management step that goes into rolling it out with the organization. So what we're going to be talking about next is the second stage. So if you feel like you're at that stage where you have your data set in a great way, that the team's using it, using the system, inputting the data, accessing the data in a way that everyone's confident and there's data fidelity throughout the entire process, then I think you're probably ready for this next step that we'll talk about, which is using the data to create charts and dashboards to make decisions and to action on. So just as a brief intro on the project or on dashboards, let's jump into one of these projects here. And with the setup in Noloco, it gives us access to all of the data and a really quick and clean, easy way to set up ways to see, the progress in the project based on the roll-up, the status of the tasks. So we see that 2 tasks are complete. So these are some things that are just out of the box in terms of metrics. But one of the nice things with the charts and dashboards is there's different ways to visualize how they work. So at this stage, it usually takes, similar to the first stage of structuring your data, it takes some sitting down and thinking like, okay, what do we need to see? And what's important to us as a company? So if it's a sales funnel or even a project funnel, visualizing it in this way can be just a quick way to come in and see from a management standpoint, okay, where are we at with the project? If it looks more like a pyramid, project's going well, especially if it's getting close to the due date. If it's a sales funnel, hopefully it looks more like a rectangle as opposed to an actual funnel that the leads that are coming in are actually converting. But by thinking through how to visualize the data, it can help speed up the process of how to make decisions and how to look at what's going on. Because going through and viewing all of the projects from this view, nice to have the progress rings of what's going on, but it doesn't give us that granular detail of, hey, what's happening with this project, and like what's with each of the time. For example, that's another common use case that we have is calculating in an invoice, and so being able to see at a task level which ones are going overtime and which ones are coming under time. So that way you can adjust or create the training that you need through the company. If you don't have that data, it's hard to know at a granular level what the blockers are. You might know that, okay, we're not meeting our progress time, but the answer of why isn't there. And so with the charts and the dashboards, it answers those questions really easily. So as a quick example, one of the things that we're working through as a team and why charts and dashboards are really useful is we've been growing quite quickly with the number of projects that we've taken on. And it's been great from a sales standpoint to see, okay, here's our lead volume, and based on our leads, this is how many projects we'll close. And that also gives us a good estimate on revenue. And so we've built different dashboards out at the project and the account level. And with activities, this might be a good example of a similar dashboard that we have where we're tracking our leads, we're tracking our revenue by month and when projects are kicking off. So we have a high level dashboard like this that shows what's happening across the organization. So in this case, we're tracking activities. We can see that it's spiked over the last few months, and it's really picked up. So it could be a good indication that the business is growing. And for us, as we've been building out our dashboards, we've been able to notice the trends and see the uptick. And so we're now able to project out of what it's going to look like from a business standpoint over the course of the year. And so we still have a long way to go to fully operationalize the dashboards to give us the insights that we need. But we've seen that with our growth, we can now plan out and see over the next few months what needs to happen with hiring, and then backtrack into our hiring plan because we know that there's a lead time to get somebody onboarded onto our team. So having the dashboards in place with historical data can allow you to make decisions based on the future, especially those difficult decisions of, if you're capital intensive, do you need to buy product, or do you need to invest in, machines to increase output? Or if you're labor intensive like we are as a company, what does that mean in terms of the team structure? What does hiring need to look like? Does a manager need to be hired, or do you need team members to really come in and tackle projects. And so with this example, another thing that we've used is we're building tools to connect communication platforms like email to no-code platforms. So just an out-of-the-box way to connect, Gmail to a system like Airtable, Noloco, or SmartSuite on the back end. And so for us, knowing uh, we call it a provider, but really the company behind the email has allowed us to make decisions on the product side of which products we're building. So we knew that the majority of our clients were using Gmail based on our CRM, and so we were able to tackle Gmail first and set the priority for our product backlog. So having the data in dashboards like this allow us to make decisions quickly and effectively as a team, as opposed to going on based on gut. Gut works really well for making decisions when you're really small, but as you scale, it's helpful to have those details at a macro level as well, so that everybody can be making the right decisions at the right time.
Brilliant. Great stuff. It'd be great. I know I might be jumping ahead to see some of the behind the scenes works and how you get some of these charts built, right? Some of the stuff you're showing us now. And I'd also love to see a little bit of how do we filter the data? You might be planning on this might be coming later. So again, you can tell me if that's the case and we can wait patiently, but there's some of the things that sprung to mind, and even just the progress bars as well. I don't know if that's included in the how-to part of this session, but how does one build a progress bar, and what is it being powered by, for example, would be cool. There's some of my curious questions.
Yeah, let's talk about the dashboards for a second, because let's go into the build mode. Dashboards are really powerful in terms of the options that we have. So to just give you an example of how the setup works, one of the latest redesigns in Noloco has brought the same view to the chart and dashboard functionality that it has with the others. So like if I'm to click on one of these records, for example, it's the same view that we have to set up a list view or a record detail view. So we can pull from a certain collection and then do filtering in the right way. So with dashboards, we can create, or I guess with the charts, we can create the charts in the same way that we would create just a normal list view or record detail view, which makes it really nice. The difference is normally with a chart page, sometimes it makes sense to display one, but the great part is it's easy to add multiple charts on a page. So in this case, what I did to create this like high level overview of what the account details look like is I created the first card that we have here for the number of projects, and then I just cloned it throughout the page.
Mhm.
Diving into what it looks like, let me actually just clone this again, and we'll move it down. So with the chart, we have a number of different options for how the chart can be displayed. So we were looking at like the funnel charts and the line charts earlier.
Yeah.
So on the data, if you're an Excel whiz, I imagine it's very similar to, building the charts in Excel as far as taking the data and displaying it.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of different options and really powerful out of the box ways to display how information is viewed. So in this case, I think one of the important parts to note is with these record views that we've created, we're using the filtering setup in Noloco in order to provide a view of the data that's specific to this account. Because if I removed the projects collection filter here, it'll show us all of the projects that are in the system, which may be nice on a metrics dashboard, but this filter allows us to create the view that we need specific to the record that we're looking at very quickly. So I don't have to write any SQL or create a formula in order to get the data to filter in the right way. Just using the native filtering that's set up in Noloco with a couple clicks of the button to put this together.
Nice. Love that. Yeah, it is really just point and click, right? And we've refined this feature a lot from when it first was introduced to Noloco. So I'm much happier with the experience we have now, which is great. Yeah, no, it's brilliant so far. Yeah.
So, and with this, yeah, I've really enjoyed working with the relative filters too. So I think that's something that we've been learning as a team, the difference between relative and is it called dynamic filters? When you apply one of these filters with the box, yeah, where you're saying, hey, based on, let's only show projects that have this name, for example.
Exactly.
So yeah, easy to combine the relative filters and the dynamic filters. I found the relative filters to be useful enough for most use cases. And then, when it's required, you can build that structure in which to look at this structure, let's actually go into the data and let's look at, we have it set up, yeah, with the permissions on the property. So it's the same filtering system on the front end that we'll use to set up permissions on the back end. So just another high level recap. Difference between filtering and permissions is at the data layer, whereas the filtering is at the UI or the presentation layer. So what this means is if a permission is set, the data won't access, there's no way for data to access the front end if a permission restricts that data. So this is really useful if you have clients that you're working with, for example. You don't want your clients to see all data about all of your customers on the back end. Sure that you set that up at the permission level and not at the filtering level on the front end. So the logic that we have is that anyone on the team, we only want them to see the accounts that they've been assigned. And so that's how this permission set is set up. It's the account owner on the project is one of the accounts collection that is associated with the user's account. And so where this is really powerful, if we come back to the app, we have similar permissions set up on a number of these tables. But if we come back to the app, we have this metrics dashboard set up. And right now we're seeing the metrics for the entire company because the user I'm currently logged in as is the company admin. So I have access to all of the data for the company. But if I switch to a user, for example, may need to click off.
Yeah.
I switch to Dane as a user, for example, because we have that permission set already in place, the data comes, we only see the data that's associated with Dane. And so again, don't have to set up complex metrics, or we don't have to set up a dashboard for every team member in order to view this. It's one of those things that's just given to us as a gift from Noloco. So has been really great when setting up apps. The permissions need to be set in place for the data that we'll be presenting to the users. And so when you're creating dashboards, knowing that you can create dashboards and not have to create multiple views. And so for us, the app that we've made, we give the same access, or it's the same app to our team members and our clients and our internal executive team. So we just create one dashboard and everybody can see the metrics that are related to them and the records that are related to them. And we don't have to worry about creating 3 different apps and maintaining those 3 different apps with every change that we make. It's one and done with the creation of our internal application, our executive dashboards, and our client-facing application.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I actually have a question for you now that we're on this sort of topic, right? So if I was to flip it on its head and say, okay, I actually want my users to have access to all the data, and like we don't need a permission rule. It's publicly accessible information for this type of user role. How could I go about seeing like all the data and then maybe applying like a filter to say, show me, you know, the region of Europe's metrics, and now I want to see North America's metrics if it was a global dashboard, let's say, of like sales performance, and I'm a sales director and I need to see all that info. So how could we go about it from that angle, where it wouldn't require a permission rule, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's go to accounts because the page we were on, I think, was just a dashboard view.
Yeah.
Um, if we go into record here and go into the metrics,
Yeah.
it's like a regular record view. We have the ability to set up filters, I believe, in
Yep. There it is.
the
Filter feed.
app. So if
Yeah.
we wanted, I don't think I have region set up in my account, but if we wanted to filter based on status, for example,
Yeah.
uh,
Perfect.
add those filters, right? To say, hey, let's only see projects that are in progress.
Nice. Yeah. And of course you could have like multiple charts in that block that's currently highlighted. So if you had like 4 highlight blocks in the same, yeah, you just simply add a chart. Exactly. Then the filter would apply on all those metrics in that block. And then if you need unique, yeah, which actually brings me to my next question. So let's say we're on an account page right now. So, all of the information is going to be related to the account. You also gave the relative filter where, you've got the child project records on an account. But let's say I want to build just a dashboard that has loads of charts powered by accounts, projects, tasks, and metrics, right? The 4 tables that just stood out to me on the left-hand side. What's the best way to go about that inside Noloco?
Yeah, that's a great question. So be curious to get your thoughts on this because
No
one of
worries.
the
I'm happy to
for a second.
I'm happy to take my own question if that helps. So this is a common question that we do get from people who first try out charts, and they realize that they're kind of tied to the account page that they're on, and they're only able to kind of build account charts on that page, but they want that more dashboard-like view. So that's where we've created blank pages. So if you head to the menu and hit the little plus icon and then choose a blank page as your option, this is not tied to any underlying table of data. Whereas obviously everything in the collections is tied to that specific table of data. So when you add a blank page to your menu sidebar, you can then add all these detail chart components and then point the chart component to the table of data you want to visualize in a chart. And then you can have all of them existing side by side on your blank page and ultimately call that your dashboard page or whatever makes sense to your team. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind if you need that more holistic view of your entire organization in one place.
So that's yeah, what you see here, right? As far as
Yeah,
I should rename this to be dashboard. To
there
be
you
more
go. There you go. So you already did it inadvertently. And you can name your blank page, of course, whatever you want. As you can see, Ben has already changed it from metrics to dashboard. But yeah, the blank page experience is the answer to that question.
so really powerful. And I believe this is fairly new too, right? It's been the last couple of months that this has come out.
God, I kind of almost lose track of time when we release things, but I would say not in the last, definitely 6 to 8 months at least. It's been around a while, but it's one of those things that was often like forgotten or overlooked. But blank pages didn't exist in the beginning and was one of the features we released when many people started shouting for them. And it made complete sense. It just required a bit of thinking on the engineer side to figure out how to create like a page that can point to many data sources when they first came into existence. But yeah, no, that's the solution there. Is there anything else you wanted to cover before I fire another question your way?
No, yeah, let's take some time for some questions.
Brilliant. Yeah. So I'm actually going to call back to an earlier part of your demonstration, which was the progress bars, which obviously was tied to a collection view or like a data table. So yeah, I'd love for you to show the audience just, how you go about that, what kind of field you need to use, and yeah, any other sort of benefits you may want to call out yourself. But yeah.
The progress bar, this is a brilliant addition to be able to quickly visualize at a high level, right? Where we don't need a chart or a dashboard in order to put this together. So the progress bar, I believe it needs to be a percentage under the hood. So if we looked at the data table for the projects, the progress here is a percentage, or I guess a decimal field, but it's formatted as a percentage. And then from there, because it's a percentage in the UI, we're able to format it as a progress bar. So you can display it as a default, but nobody wants to see a number. Number's kind of boring. So you can set it as either a progress bar, which will display as a bar or as a ring. Um, you can be like your Apple Watch and set up the progress bars to close your rings with your projects.
Brilliant. Yeah, great. Yeah, I've actually used this in a few different ways as well myself. So decimal and integer fields are compatible with being able to display your output as a progress ring or a progress bar. But what's really cool is if you look at the maximum ring value option there. So what I've done with this before is I've had, let's say, it's actually on the Noloco Academy, believe it or not. So we know on a Noloco Academy, there's always 12 lessons on one of our courses. And then for the max value, I just pointed to the roll-up summary field of number of lessons on the course. So lessons was the summary of aggregation, and the related number of lessons in that course was used to calculate that number. So that's like the max value. And then for the actual value for the progress ring, it was like number of lessons in progress. So that was dynamically updating. So it was like 6, 1 of 12, 2 of 12, 3 of 12. So it's actually very dynamic. So if I went to that course and maybe added a 13th or 14th lesson, it would like propagate everywhere across the app. So you can actually make these rings very static or very dynamic, depending on the other fields that you're pointing this progress bar to. You can actually make it quite dynamic. So that was another kind of use case I wanted to call out that maybe people would see being applicable in their own world potentially.
The same way with the progress. I didn't set it up here, but yeah, doing the roll-ups and having formula fields make it really easy to make these progress bars dynamic, which is cool, right? Where you set it up once and then it's just good to go. And that's the whole idea of, I think, what we're doing is to not repeat ourselves time and time and time again.
Exactly. So yeah, I don't think there's any other questions. The only other question I have for you, I suppose, is how can people find out about you and Automation Helpers? If anyone here is like tuning in and thinking, actually, I'd love to reach out to Ben's team and get a project up and running, where can they go to find that information out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you go to automationhelpers.com, we do have a form where you can submit your information, or you can email me directly, ben@automationhelpers.com. So we help with everything from consultations. If you just need some help to figure out complex formulas or putting a dashboard together. We also do projects. And then we have a number of clients where it's an ongoing relationship where there's so much to build out, like we're saying, from the data structure to building out the dashboards and then getting to AI use cases. Our team, we have a variety of people on the team. Everyone's trained in no code, but we have some programmers. Dan, my co-founder, and our background is actually at an AI chatbot company. So we have a number of AI use cases that we tackle too. So if you have any questions or want help with a project, feel free to reach out to me directly or submit an inquiry on our website, and we'll reach out to you and help you get going.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I think for anyone tuning in right now, or even on the YouTube video that we'll upload, and questions came up that during the webinar that you'd love answered after the fact, please do, comment on the video, or feel free to reach me on my email, jill@noloco.io, and we can get back to you. Whether I need to funnel some of those questions through to Ben, I can do as well. But if it's just questions about the product, the content, anything that we've shown today, please do let me know. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end of today's session. We're giving everyone 2 minutes back of their time, which I think is a win. But really, Ben, thank you so much for joining us today and taking us through some of those concepts. I think the lack of questions is honestly because the demonstration was so clear and really just painted a perfect picture of everything you were talking about. So hats off to you on that front. And yeah, I look forward to bringing you along for another webinar in the future. But yeah, just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today, Ben.
Thanks, Jill. Thanks, everyone.
Talk to you all soon, everyone. And yeah, thank you for your time.